Welcome to another new week of all things people, power, and politics on Detroit's only nightly political talk show. As you know, this is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We're glad you made this your home for unbiased political news, whether you're watching on TV or on the Fox local app. So toss that phone aside and hang with us for a bit. President Trump putting tariffs on the big screen. You see, he's slapping taxes on movies made overseas. The reason he says they're necessary, coming up. And we're taking your questions about the economy right to the experts. Financial planner Dan Casey about where we are and where we're headed. But we begin tonight in Ann Arbor, where Attorney General Dana Nessel has dismissed the charges against 7 people over the pro-Palestine encampment at U of M's campus last year. They were charged with trespassing and resisting and obstructing police. Nessel says she stands by the charges, but the court hasn't decided if there's enough evidence for them to stand trial despite months of hearings. She also said in a public statement supporting her office from a nonprofit ended up getting communicated to the court. Nessel's statement went on to say this: these distractions and ongoing delays have created a circus-like atmosphere to these proceedings. While I stand by my charging decisions and believe, based on the evidence, a reasonable jury would find the defendants guilty of the crimes alleged, I no longer believe these cases to be prudent use of my department's resources, and as such, she says, I've decided to dismiss these cases. Now to the story that has everybody talking over the weekend. President Trump with a peculiar answer to a question about upholding the Constitution over the weekend. This was in an interview with NBC's Meet the Press over this weekend. For context, moderator Kristen Welker was interviewing him about the immigration issue and if the people he accuses of being criminals living illegally in our country deserve due process. That's when she asked this, and take a listen to his response.
We have thousands of people that are some murderers and some drug dealers and some of the worst people on earth, some of the worst, most dangerous people on earth. And I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said. What you said is not what I heard the Supreme Court said. They have a different interpretation.
Well, keep in mind, just 3 months ago, part of the president's oath of office was to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And as far as due process goes, this is what the Constitution has to say about it. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And that part that says any person is really key here. It's the part many say is what's at issue here. The president also talked about the suggestion he could run for a third term, something that's not allowed under the 22nd Amendment. He said while there is support, he's not looking to do that, adding he wants to have 4 great years and then turn it over to someone else to carry forward. That's not the only thing President Trump said making headlines tonight. He says a 100% tariff should be slapped on all foreign films. He claims the film industry is dying in the U.S. because other countries are giving better incentives to studios like large tax breaks. The Commerce Department and U.S. Trade Representative are in charge with putting it in place. President Trump talked about the idea at the White House.
They've done is other nations have been stealing the movie-making capabilities from the United States. If they're not willing to make a movie inside the United States, then we should have a tariff on movies that come in.
Now, the other thing President Trump says he's going to reopen is Alcatraz prison. It's on an island off of San Francisco, about 1.5 miles away, and it's been closed for more than 60 years. The reason, he says, it became too expensive to house America's worst criminals because everything from food to fuel had to come in by boat. That's the reason it closed 60 years ago. Since then, it's really been nothing more than a tourist destination. The president wants to house who he calls America's most ruthless and violent criminals there. But Democrats say this is just a distraction.
It's an idea I've had. It's a symbol of law and order. And, you know, it's got quite a history, frankly.
He talks about everything but actually fixing the economy and lowering price of goods and lowering the cost of housing. And it's all smoke and mirrors. So when you start doing these individual things, it creates more chaos and more confusion for the American people.
A spokesperson for the Bureau of Prisons says they'll allow all presidential orders, but didn't immediately answer questions about how practical or feasible the reopening of Alcatraz could actually be. And that's not all going on in the world of politics. So let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories we're following at this hour. So much news coming out of this administration. The Army pausing helicopter flights near Reagan National Airport in Washington after 2 close calls last week. 2 commercial airlines had to abort landings last week because of an Army Black Hawk helicopter flying to the Pentagon. The feds are looking into this, and officials say the pause started Friday. You'll remember 67 people died when a passenger jet and Army helicopter collided midair in January at Reagan Airport. Take you to the courtroom now. 17 state attorneys general, including Michigan's, are suing the Trump administration over his push to stop wind energy development. The president signed the order his first day in office, pausing approvals, permits, and loans for all wind energy projects. The states say President Trump doesn't have the authority to unilaterally shut down the permitting process. They also say he's putting development of the power source in jeopardy. A White House spokesperson says the AGs are using lawfare to stop what they call the president's popular energy agenda. But that's not the only lawsuit Attorney General Dana Nessel is involved with. 19 states and Washington, D.C. challenging cuts to the U.S. Health and Human Services Agency. They say it's destroyed life-saving programs and left states paying the bill for health crises. More than 10,000 workers have been eliminated and 28 agencies collapsed into 15 since Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. took office. The state attorneys general are pushing to get these cuts reversed.
This administration is taking a wrecking ball to the Department of Health and Human Services. HHS is responsible for protecting and preserving public health. And since taking office, this administration has fired scientists, closed labs, shuttered life-saving programs without rhyme, reason, or any legal authority. Nothing but devastating consequences for millions of Americans. This is not government reform. This is not efficiency.
The Trump administration is already facing legal challenges over cuts to public health agencies, most notably the decision to cut $11 billion for COVID-19 initiatives and other health projects. Many people argue COVID's been long over and it's time to move that money somewhere else. From reopening Alcatraz to movie tariffs, the president made a lot of news this weekend. Oh yeah, collections on student loans restarted too. We're diving into all of it with Sherry Gagnago and James David Dixon, 2 people on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but who managed to see eye to eye enough to have a civil discussion. Novel? We don't think so. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics on another week, and it is a busy one already. This week of news kicked off really on Sunday, and so much has been talked about already. Conservative commentator James David Dixon and Sherry Gagnago, a regular on The Pulse, and someone who's very community-minded. 2 people, again, as I say, on opposite ends of the political spectrum, but managed to have a civil discussion, something that we should have more of in our great country. So we'll begin with you, James. I want to ask you, everything that you heard in the monologue just now that this president proposed, Alcatraz, movie tariffs, and so much more. Is this all just a distraction that President Trump is masterful at creating to bait people who don't like him into talking about those things while he's getting other work done?
Oh, I would ask a distraction from what? And I would kind of recast this baiting people into being interested in politics, right? 200 years ago, a guy like Andrew Jackson was saying we should put a ballot into the hands of every white man in America. We've since moved a lot further past race, but Trump is democratizing politics in his own way by making it interesting and accessible to the average person by talking about things like Alcatraz, by daring you to go on a website and use the search bar to see how much government is overspending. These things make politics interesting and accessible, and it's been designed to be the opposite.
So it's fascinating that you say that, because I do understand what you're saying. There is an accessibility to the topics that he talks about. But for instance, creating an AI image of himself as the Pope and putting that on the White House X file, right, and putting it out there. that is not just making politics accessible to people. That is creating a conversation piece. Alcatraz is too expensive to run. That's why it shut down 60 years ago. That is not something, perhaps these are distractions from all of the tariffs and some of the issues economically that this president's facing, yes?
I think they're all things he wants to actually do. I think he would love to do Alcatraz. He loves things that existed when he was a younger person. He's very nostalgic and very superstitious and very wanting things to return to how they were. So I wouldn't put it past him to actually want that.
Sherry Gay-Dagnago, when you see some of these things, including the AI-generated Pope picture, I know, I'm married to a Catholic woman whose family is in a very conservative parish down south in Louisiana, but a lot of them are Trump supporters, and a lot of them are ignoring or turning the cheek away from some of the offensive images out there. Do you think that that's something that's happening?
Yeah. So I think it's really cultish, the way that people blindly continue to follow and try to reason with irrational behavior. I think, as President Obama stated, if he had done any of these things, there would have been an immediate call for him to be removed from the White House.
He wore a tan suit.
He did wear the tan suit. I was just going to say that.
And I'm sorry I wore pink and purple, but happy Cinco de Mayo. Okay,
sure.
We want to have some color here. But I mean, it's making mockery, and it's making us to laughing in the butt of all jokes around the world, and it's quite embarrassing. I don't know how anyone, especially Catholics, can look at that and not be highly offended and embarrassed. That's one. But May is Mental Health Month. I don't know how any African American, though, can celebrate and say he wants to bring things back to the way they were. When what? Before the Civil Rights Movement? Before we had access to voting? Before what? Before we could live in communities where we wouldn't be chased out because of race? Where our children had to attend separate and unequal schools? How far back does he really want to go? And where is he trying to take us? But he's telling us every day by the way that he's implementing these executive orders.
I think a lot of people would take a return to prior to 2021. Before we had 10 million more illegals brought in across the border by Joe Biden, essentially at his behest. This is just as important. Getting them out of the country is just as important as Indian removal was in the 19th century. Lewis Cass, one of our governors, spent a lot of time in the 1800s negotiating treaties with Indian tribes. And because we have them, that's why we're able to live here and be prosperous together. And so until we get these people who have no business being here removed,
and Sherry, if you don't mind, just for a moment.
Okay.
There's one new development in all of this that has happened on this Monday when this president said, hey, maybe we should give $1,000 and a plane ticket and help people self-deport. And while we laugh at everything that happens because there's so much news that comes out of this White House, is there anything inherently wrong with that in your mind?
Well, I'll have to say this. When it comes down to the people that have been imported, the immigrants that have come in illegally, and the burden and the financial responsibility that unfortunately all of our taxpayers have had to undergo, certainly I don't support that, especially as an African-American woman who has often been left out of the equation when it comes down to all the investments that are made into folks that are coming into our country, illegal aliens, and we not be given the same life raft. So I truly understand that. And it's certainly not equal. When it was the Haitians trying to come and seek refuge, they were beaten back with horses and guns and weapons. So it's always separate and unequal with respect to African Americans and people of color or people from the African diaspora.
Did the Biden-Harris team fail the country in not handling the border properly until this President Biden at the time decided 2 months before a debate to start using his executive powers to change things?
That was a very challenging issue, and I think it's unfair when we look back at, I believe it was Senate Bill number 1. I forget the number, but the bottom line is there was a bipartisan effort to move forward with addressing issues at the border, and unfortunately, President Trump drug his feet and did not want to move that legislation because that made the argument in the case for his existence. And so, yes, there was a lot of things that could have been done differently, but he doesn't seem to be doing a much better job.
There's no American law that changed that's changed the numbers at the border since January 20th. It's Trump said it best. You didn't need to change the law. You needed to change the president.
But you need to change the No, that's not true. The issues that we have with
wanted to agree with me. There was a small part of of you that wanted to.
The issues with respect to the courts that had to handle these cases and the level of security that was at the border and the pressure that was put on all of them, there had to be appropriations that would address that as well. So it's not just about changing the president. We had to change the construct and the way that those issues were funded and how they were properly staffed.
But Sherry, the former President Biden, argued that he wasn't simply able to do the things that were necessary without the help of Congress. And this President Trump proved that he was wrong by making sure he could get it done without Congress necessarily giving their blessing.
Well, I mean, you had people who was following decorum, and I guess in some instances that is why some people have lined up in liking this president in the way that he's been very bodacious and just having disrespect for the Constitution, having disrespect for Congress, and many of them have just sat by, and now we're adjudicating the presidency by having all these lawsuits that's flying from all over the country, addressing the savage inequalities that he's created, even with the budget. I mean, you think about Michigan here. AmeriCorps funding has been taken away. Over 100 organizations is impacting our schools. You look at IRS and how about 40% of the staff is going to be gone. I mean, you name it.
So, James,
it's just unbelievable.
We know that DOJ obviously wanted to cut $2 trillion. They ended up saving $160 billion. Right. Do you believe that they moved too quickly, or do you believe that they moved at the correct pace?
Well, they failed. They didn't get the $2 trillion. So quickly, slowly, they did not hit the number they were trying to hit. And that's why you want to typically under-promise and over-deliver. Elon Musk kind of over-delivered and under-promised, so it is a big number, but it would be a lot bigger if it were compared to 0 as opposed to $2 trillion.
It never is enough time, but I want to say, James David Dixon, good to have you back. Sherry, always good to see you here on The Pulse. Two people who we really value your opinions, and we ask you to come back again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time here. Up next, the economic uncertainty leaving many people with questions out there. We're taking yours to a financial planner. We say the show's all about you. We got a lot of questions for our guy, Dan Casey. That's coming up next. We'll be right back. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. Joining us now to answer your political questions and talk about the economy, Dan Casey with Bridge River Advisors. It's good to see you, Dan. Thanks for joining us here at The Pulse. You know, I love it when we have viewers who take us down the road of the conversation because you have so many great questions. And many of you asked me, hey, ask Dan this question. So you're getting free financial planning today, which is good. We begin with Shar. Thanks for your question here on The Pulse tonight, Shar. We appreciate you writing in. You're asking, is there any way to plan for the future to protect your family's savings? You know, with all this uncertainty, what is the answer to that question?
What makes that a great question is protect it from what? So I could protect it from stock market losses. Let's throw it all in cash. But you're not protecting it from inflation. All right, so you can't protect it from inflation. Let's throw it in the stock market. That gets the best growth. Well, now your principal could be lost significantly, right? So it really goes back to what are we saving for exactly? Give me the time frame, give me what portions of that money you need and when, and then we can divide it into the necessary buckets so we can get cash and we can get some safety, we can get some growth, we can get a lot of mix it all together.
That's really so it's different for everybody. It depends on what their goal is, right? Yeah. The next question is coming from Kathleen. Kathleen, thanks for writing in on The Pulse here tonight. What are the pros and cons of putting money in bank CDs versus investing in the market, whether it be stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc.? This is a good one.
Another good one, yes. So, and this is now, I get this question a lot because CD rates are so high now because the Federal Reserve raised rates. So, but what we're finding is like the CDs right now are paying 4-5%, maybe 5%, but so is money markets, which is super liquid, super safe. So why would you just not put your money in a super safe liquid money market and not lock your money up into a CD? But again, it does go back to that's great and all, but if you need growth, you're certainly not getting it in a money market or a CD. So it's a matter of just blending the proper investment so you get the right ups and downs and the right growth and the right liquidity.
And right meaning where you are, because if you're near retirement, you want one thing. If you're, I'm 48 years old, it's going to be different for me than someone who's 60. Absolutely. Yeah. Just depends on what people
have. The retirement red zone. If you're like within 5 years of retirement, you've got to start doing some shifting.
I hope I'm way up. But, that's the goal.
We all do.
All right, Adam, we thank you for your question here. How will the tariffs affect investments in 401ks as well as prices at the store? How can the average American plan for this? This is fascinating because a lot of people, they follow the headlines briefly. like there's certain tariffs that they talked about but that aren't in effect yet.
Yes.
But how should people prepare for these?
So it's interesting. So the last cargo ships are coming in from, pre-tariff. So we probably got another maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks. And then I think we're going to start seeing some issues with supply, maybe some empty shelves, right? So we're going to temporarily definitely get some inflation spikes. And how it helps or hurts the corporations is that could hit their profits, which could start hitting our 401ks and our investments. So it'll be an interesting up and down. Short term it's going to be worst case, and we'll see how it pans out in the long term.
And a lot of people are saying, okay, you know what, with these cargo ships coming in with new prices kind of on them, maybe it's time for me to go out and buy things that I need.
Yes.
So you go back to school shopping, so to speak, way earlier than you would otherwise, right? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, if you need it, get it now, because you just don't know what the prices are going to be. So we are seeing a lot of people, pull forwarding their investments, whether it's a car or pencils for school, for sure.
It's so smart that you see certain companies, the furniture company, that's saying, hey, we have a tariff-free week or a tariff-free sale or what have you. That's a really smart way to look at people like Adam and say, hey, what are we doing here? Yeah. Hey, Jim, we have a question for you. Want to answer your question with Dan Casey here on The Pulse, and we thank you for writing us in today. Here's your question. Very large companies have seemed to have more resources, geographic diversity, and political clout to deal with tariffs than small companies. Should we adjust our portfolio to overweight larger companies? That's a really good one. What do we do?
It's a really good one. Normally, I would say yes. However, we're in this weird situation where I would want to also be in small and mid cap, because as the Federal Reserve cuts rates, those companies have variable debt loans. So they're going to start saving a lot of money when the Federal Reserve cuts rates. So I should see a rise in those companies. So really not overweighting necessarily in large companies makes sense right now.
And then let's talk for a moment about the politics of this, because this is a political talk show. And we know that this is a president who uses tariffs as a negotiation tool, yet at the same time it affects our bottom line. So that's a hard dance to follow here.
It really is. And that's half the time, my day is talking people off the cliff from people wanting to, get out of the market or what. And it's so difficult. It's just, again, in the short term, we just have to stay strong. We can't act on emotions, and we have to stay in. Because as soon as we get that headline about China, and maybe we have a deal, stock market can be off.
Well, we know that Shar, Kathleen, Adam, and Jim had great questions, but I want to ask you, what's the #1 question that you get from people who come to your office right away?
Yeah, probably the #1 question is, do I have enough money to last my retirement? That's the #1 question. So, and again, it goes back to our first question, just having the right assets in the right bucket, so we can get safety, we can get some growth, and we can get some liquidity for income.
No one wants to outlive their money, but it's a fear that so many people have, especially when there's uncertainty out there. But we're going to follow the headlines as we do every night on this show. We're going to have Dan back as well. You'll come back again?
Absolutely.
It was a good experience for you? You'll come back on the Pulse?
Absolutely.
Great.
Great questions.
We'll have you back. Great questions. If you have a question, you can always let us know. In fact, that is the Pulse for tonight, but you can always send us your political questions or any kind of question you want answered or a fact check you'd like to see. Just go to this email, thepulse@fox.com. You'll see that right over there. You can also scan the QR code to auto-launch your email on your phone. I'm Roop Raj. It was good to be with you. As always, have a good night. Thank you, Dan.
Awesome.